Now, in all this discussion, one possibility has been overlooked. Suppose that the balls don't move at all, but that the space between them moves. After all, we speak of a distance. An example, space, increasing or decreasing, as if it were a thing that could do something. This is the problem of the expanding universe and the other galaxies moving away from ours, or ours from them, or all from each other. Astronomers are trying to settle the problem by saying that space itself is expanding. But again, who is to decide? What moves, the galaxies or the space? The fact that no decision has been reached itself is a clue to the answer. Not just that both the galaxies and space are expanding, as if they were two different agents, but that something which we most clumsily call galaxies, space, or solid space is expanding. The problem comes up because we ask the question in the wrong way. We suppose that solids were one thing and space quite another, or just nothing, whatever. Then it appeared that space was no mere nothing because solids couldn't do without it. But the mistake in the beginning was to think of solids and space as two different things, instead of as two aspects of the same thing. The point is that they are different but inseparable, like the front end, the rear end of a cat. Cut them apart and the cat dies. Take away the crest of the wave and there is no through. A similar solution applies to the ancient problem of cause and effect. We believe that everything and every event must have a cause, that is, some other things or events, and that it will, in its turn, be the cause of other effects. So, how does a cause lead to an effect? To make it much worse, if all that I think that it's a set of effects, there must be causes for all of them going back into an indefinite past. If so, I can't help what I do. I am simply a puppet pulled by strings that go back into times far beyond my vision. Again, this is a problem which comes from asking the wrong question. Here is someone who has never seen a cat. He is looking through a narrow slit in a fence, and on the other side, a cat walks by. He sees first the head, then the less distinctly shaped furry trunk, and then the tail. Extraordinary. The cat turns round and walks back, and again he sees the head, and a little later the tail. This sequence begins to look like something regular and reliable. Yet again the cat turns around, and he witnesses the same regular sequence. First the head, and later the tail. Thereupon he reasons that the event will be invariable and necessary because of the event tail, which is the head's effect. This absurd and confusing gobbledygook is coming from the cat's failure to see that the head and the tail go together, and they are all one cat. The cat wasn't born as a head, which sometime later caused a tail. It was born all of a piece, a head-tailed cat. Our observer's trouble was that he was watching it through a narrow slit, and he couldn't see the whole cat at once. The narrow slit in the fence is much like the way in which we look at life by conscious attention. For when we attend to something, we ignore everything else. Attention is narrowed perception. It is a way of looking at life bit by bit, using memory to string the bits together, as when examining a dark room with a flashlight, having a very narrow beam. Perception, thus narrowed, has the advantage of being sharp and bright, but it has to focus on one area of the world after another, and one feature after another featurette. And where there are no features, only space or uniform surfaces, it somehow gets bored and reaches and searches about for more features. Attention is therefore something like a scanning mechanism in a radar or a television set, or as Norbert Wiener and his colleagues would put it, well, we found some evidence that there is a similar process in the brain. But a scanning process that observes the world bit by bit soon persuades its user that the world is a great collection of bits and beads and bams. And these he calls separate things or events, reach us from outworldly, often stationed radars that say you can only think of one thing at a time in this space and time, multidimensional universe, galaxy, star, planet. The truth is, looking into your being, as the world comes to an end, bit by bit, we conceive and convince ourselves that it consists of separate things, and so give ourselves the problem of how these things are connected and how they cause and affect each other. The problem would never have arisen if it would have been aware of itself, and it would just be a way of looking at the world which has clipped and chopped off into separate bits, things, events, causes, and effects. We do not see that the world is all of a piece, like the head-tailed cat. We also speak of attention as noticing. To notice is to select, to regard some bits of perception or some featurettes of the world as more noteworthy, more significant than others. To these we attend and the rest we ignore, for which reason conscious attention is at the same time ignorance. Ignorance, despite the fact that it gives us vividly clear pictures of whatever we choose to notice. Physically, we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch immeasurable, innumerable features and featurettes that we never noticed before. You can drive 30 miles talking all the time to a friend. What you noticed and remembered was the conversation, but somehow you responded to the road, the other cars, the traffic lights, and heaven knows what else, without really noticing or focusing your mental activity on the spotlight upon them. So too you can talk to someone at a party without remembering, for immediate recall, what clothes he or she was wearing, because they were not noteworthy or significant enough to you. Yet certainly your eyes and nerves responded to those clothes. You saw, but did not really look. It seemed that we would notice through a double process in which the first factor is a choice of what is interesting or important to us. The second factor, working simultaneously with the first, is that we need to note and a notation for almost anything that can be noticed with an eye. Notation is a system of symbols, words, numbers, signs, simple images like squares, triangles, musical notes, letters, ideographs, as in Chinese, and scales for dividing and distinguishing a variation of color or of tones. Such symbols enable us to classify our bits of perception. They are the labels on the pigeonholes in which memories sort themselves. But it is the most words for different kinds of snow because they live with it and it is important to them. But the Aztec language but one word for snow, rain, and hail. What governs what we choose to notice? Fact. The first thing that we shall notify when we qualify later on is whatever seems advantageous or disadvantageous for our species' survival, our social status, and the security of our egos. The second, again working simultaneously with the first, is the pattern and the logic of all the notation symbols which we have learned from from others, from our society and culture to yours. It is hard indeed to notice anything for which the languages are available to us, whether verbal, mathematical, musical, have no description whatsoever. This is why we borrow words from foreign languages. There is no English word for a type of feeling which the Japanese call yujin, and we call and understand by opening the minds and simulations to which the Japanese people use this word. They must be numerous and numberless as the featurettes and dimensions of the world in which our senses respond without our conscious attention, let alone vibrations such as cosmic rays, having wavelengths to which our senses are not yet tuned into. To perceive all vibrations at once would be a pandemonium, as when someone slams down all the keys of the piano at the same time. But there are two ignored factors which can very well come into our awareness and our ignorance into them as a mainstream mainstay of the ego illusion and the failure to know. We are each other, the one self in disguise. The first is not realizing that so called opposites, such as light and darkness, sound and silence, solid and space, on and off, inside, outside, appearing, disappearing, cause, effect, poles, aspects, all the same thing altogether. It is the same thing. But we have no word for that thing, save which on though vows into all concepts such as existence, being, God, the ultimate ground of being. For the most part, these ramen noodles are remaining nebulous to the ideas into which the becoming is in vivid sections of the feelings and experiences. The second closely related is the aspect of the absorbed in consciousness attention. So convinced with this narrowed kind of perception, it is not itself real as a way of seeing the world, but also the very basic sensation. One which, as oneself, as a conscious being, would remind himself or herself or thyself of fully being hypnotized by its disjointed vision of the whole universe. We really feel that this world is indeed an assemblage of separate things, that we have somehow come together or perhaps fallen apart, and that we are really one and under them. We see all of them all at once, born alone, dying alone, maybe as bits of fragments of the universal whole, and expandable parts of a big machine. Rarely do we see all so called things and events going together like the head and tail of a cat, and the tones and inflections and the infictitious rising and falling of the coming and going of a single singing voice. In other words, we do not play the game of black and white, the universal game of up and down, on and off, solid space, and each all. Instead, we play the game of black versus white, or more usually, white versus black, for especially when rates of vibration are slowing down with the whim and vigor of day and life, and death and night, we are forced to be aware of the black and negative aspect of the world, then not realizing the Zen, its inseparably positive, negative pole of the rhythm we are all afraid of. The black may win the game, but the game white supremacy must win is no longer a game. It is a fight haunted by a sense of chronic frustration because we're all doing something crazy and we're trying to keep this mountain going up and ridding the valleys of the picks. And the persimbadan in the life versus death dance of the bohemian so-called battle for survival, which is supposed to be real, serious talk of all living creatures, the illusion of the mambo. God, because the fight is temporarily successful, we go on living until we don't, and B, because living requires effort and ingenuine. The ingenuine Though this is also true of games distinctly different from the flights and fights and the norms of the sofaring. Elect animals, you do not live in a constant anxiety mode. You absorb it from the sickness and death of your owner. Because the life that you live is very present. Nevertheless, you'll fight the fight when you're that, and the banks of the river will fold in. And when attacked, we must prepare. However, be careful and take animals into consideration as a model of perfectly natural behavior. It's natural, meaning good, wise. Human beings can improve on animals, though they do not always seem to do so. But human beings, especially in the Western civilization, make death a great boogie. This has something to do with the popular the Christian belief that death will be followed by the dread last judgment when sinners will be consigned to the temporary horrors of the purgatory of the everlasting agony of hell. More usual today is the fear of the death within us that takes us into the everlasting nothingness, as if that could be some sort of experience, like being buried alive forever. No more friends, no more sunlight and burn, no more laughter, no more ocean and stars, only darkness without an end. Do not be gentle into the good that be the night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Imagination cannot grasp simple nothingness, and must therefore ill the void from the fantasies that we experiment on. With a sound, da, da, where subjects are suspended in air, weightless all, and sounding as if light-proof rooms. When death is considered, the final victory of black over white is a deadly syndrome of a serious battle of white must win. The fantasy which all of the void is largely flourishing in. Even the popular fantasy of heaven on earth seemingly decide in the image of God. It's all a very serious and awesome grandfather move, enthroned in a colossal church. And of course, in a church, one may decorously rejoice, but not have real rip-roaching fun, or with their joy and their glory must be those endless Sabbaths and blessed ones see. So who wants we to be stuck forever in a church wearing a surplice and singing hallelujah forever? Wah! Images, strictly symbolic, but we must all know how children feel about the old-time Protestant Sabbaths, and God-good books bound in black lights terrible tippa, insignificant. Outgrowing this bad imagery, but in the childhood mode, it's seeped into the unconscious, and it continues to contaminate our feelings about death. Individual feelings about death are conditioned by social attitudes, and it is doubtful that there is any one natural and inborn emotion connected with dying.